Hi, everyone. It's Craig. Welcome to Cutting the Crap with Shap. Thank you so much for checking out my podcast. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and Spotify. That's how we grow our channel. I am very excited to be here with Peg. Just so everybody knows, before I introduce her, before we ever got on the podcast, Peg and I had an amazing conversation. I had to stop it because I said, listen, we're going to cover all the content before we ever get on. So we have to stop. So Peg is, she's a speaker, author, educator, mentor, leader. She's got a lot of things. And I can tell you from the brief moments that we spoke before we hopped on, she is going to share so much about education that's going to be worthwhile. We're going to have a great conversation. I'm really excited. So, Peg, how are you doing?
Otherwise, it'd be lunch. Not that that would be a bad thing, but yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you again.
Tell us a little bit about you, what you're about.
Well, first of all, as I was telling Craig, I've been in education now 30 years, so I've adopted a new schedule last year, which gives me a chance to be on the road a little bit more uh, with my books, gives me a chance to work with teachers a little bit more. But for 30 years, I started my career as an English teacher at an all-girls private school, and from there I went to a suburban school, alternative education, and from there I became an instructional coach and reading specialist at a high school in the largest school district in the state of Wisconsin, and that's where I spent the last 9, 10 years or so. And one of the things that we were talking about that resonated with both of us so much is that ability to want to stay in the game, to continue working with teachers, continue supporting teachers. And it's interesting, earlier as we were talking, Craig, you used the word help. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, about help and support. But we have this, I think, innate desire to want to do what we can to take care of each other. You know, education right now, it's not what it used to be. I'll word it that way. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but there's been some challenges. And as educators, we really have to embrace each other and do whatever we can to keep working to make sure that our students are receiving quality instruction. So how can we continue to help each other? That's what it's all about.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, that's true. And Peg and I were having this conversation, and hopefully, if you are a new teacher, I mean, hopefully all of you, whether you're new or veterans, will watch. But if you're a new teacher, Peg and I had this very brief but meaningful conversation I think is going to resonate. If you are somebody new, please ask for help. Please do not think that you have it all figured out, because Peg is a veteran teacher. I am a veteran teacher. We have over 60 years combined experience teaching and being with kids. We don't have all the answers. If we do not have all the answers and you are somebody just out of college and starting to teach, you can't have all the answers. There's always things to learn. And I would really encourage you to reach out to Peg. I'll have Peg's contact information at the end. You can obviously reach out to me, and we would love to help you. So before we get going into content, I want to ask you a question. I want you to tell me one word that best describes you.
Empathetic.
That's a biggie.
I think we've lost some of that. I think people tend to, it's become all about us because of social media. And I think we need to get back to that empathy. Being good listeners. Oh my gosh, the way we talk over each other, the way we don't listen, we don't hear what people are saying. You know, when you're talking, I'll use you and I as an example. You're talking and I'm thinking, okay, what is my next comment going to be? What's my next word going to be? No, just sit, listen, reflect, respond. Empathetic. We need more of that, more empathy.
Yeah, well, I mean, empathy and listening are two things for effective teaching. It is impossible to be a truly effective leader, teacher, reading specialist, or anybody working with kids if you lack empathy and you can't listen.
Well, how often too, Craig, have you seen kids in your classroom that have said nothing, but by saying nothing, they have spoken volumes? Body language, that look in their eye, something's not right. They're saying nothing, but yet you and I look at them and think, oh, I've got to keep an eye on this kid today. Something's not good.
But Peg, you're talking about, and this is kind of like the conversation it's going to be like, because I have so much respect for Peg. I'm just listening to her. The thing is that you're talking about skills that you're not taught in college. You're talking about.
I think
Do
that's
I
another podcast.
yes. Do I believe that you can learn those skills? I do. I do believe you can learn it, but you have to want to learn them. Because nobody. I remember sitting in college decades ago. My professors never told me to watch body language. So I had to learn to do that on my own. And it's something wherever you are in your career in education, or even if you're not in education, if you're in the business world, read the room. Learn how to read the room. If you see this, you might want to make an adjustment. Like
And
like that.
I've seen that with adults too. I presented last week, and in my presentation, um, I was supposed to speak until 3:15, 3:30, something like that. And I ended it at 3 o'clock because I could tell teachers were getting tired. They had a keynote, a lunch note, afternoon sessions, a lot of sitting. Even somebody said, even one of my participants said, wow, now I know what it's like for students. They're right there, empathy. So it was one of those things where I ended early, not because I ran out of things to say. We could have kept rolling for sure. But that look in their eye, they were done. They had come gotten what they wanted to. And you have to be aware of that, whether you're talking to adults or whether you're talking to your students.
Well, what you did though is you didn't make it about you.
No,
Yeah, you didn't
definitely
make.
about my participants. What can I do to support them and give them what they need to be successful?
And that's no different than in the classroom.
Right.
So
Agreed.
I will say something that's very interesting. When I start my first day of school with kids, a lot of the students, some of the students I know because I've had them the previous year, depending on the class, but there'll be some I don't know. And one of my first questions is, hi everybody, it's Shap. Thank you so much. I'm so glad everybody's here. Can I ask you a question? And they'll be, yeah, Shap. And I'm like, whose class is this? And they'll be like, what do you mean? And I'm like, whose class is it? And they're like, Shap, it's your class. And I'm like, it is? Really? How's it my class? And they're like, well, you're the teacher. I'm like, well, hold on a second. There's 30 of you. How can it be my class? There's 30 of you. And they'll just look at me like this. And I'm like, listen, it's our class.
Right.
It's our class. We work together. I am just another person in our class. And that's kind of like by you stopping at 3 o'clock like you did, that shows, first of all, it shows an unbelievable amount of discipline and awareness and empathy and understanding of the participants that were there. Because instead of you just going just for the sake of going, you decided, you know what? They've gotten what they're going to get. There's no reason for me to keep going, and I'll stop there, which I respect so much.
Well, and I always offer links. I always offer, reproducibles, graphic organizers in my presentation. Here are the links. You can look all of that on your own, peruse it, review it. But it was time to go. And that was okay. That was all right. And I think that's the other thing too. How often have teachers, so I'm now segueing to something else, but how often have we felt, oh, we've got to finish this unit. We've got to move on to the next unit, the next lesson. Sometimes that's not a wise choice. It's just right. Sometimes it's just not. So what can we do to make this stuff stick without always cramming more? Are we talking breadth? Are we talking depth? I think we've got a bunch of podcasts going here, Craig. I'll stop now.
God, no. Oh my God, Peg. So before I ask you this next question, I just want to mention something quickly. One of my biggest um, stressors in education, not as much now because I'm coming towards the end of my teaching career, do a lot more presenting and speaking, is I can't understand why there is this must have of throwing so much crap at kids. I can't understand it. I can't. And this goes back to I was reading, Peg gave me a bunch of notes. And I was reading her notes, and I'll tell everybody honestly, everything that she gave me, I said this. Yep, 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 yep. Every single thing was things that I think about all of the time. All of the time. And it's going to go to my first question. So you have this here, you have this. What is the not yet approach? Can you touch on it?
Yeah, the whole idea here, and I'll do one of these.
Yep, please do.
This. Okay. So the not yet approach, to me, first of all, the reason I wrote the book and the reason I go on the road and talk about it is because we definitely have a motivational problem in our classroom with our students. We are fighting this. Call it whatever you want, but we are. It's just a fact. Okay. So instead of getting ourselves, which we have for the past several years, almost in a, what are we going to do about it? It's here. That's all there is. What is the plan now that we can work together? So in looking at engagement, in looking at apathy, students just appear apathetic. There's no, why bother? What do I need this for? That kind of thing. The not yet approach talks about building in setbacks and obstacles along the way. Let students know that the work is going to be hard. You're going to encounter a setback. You're going to encounter an obstacle. And that's okay because we're going to work together to get there. And you might have to work independently to get there. So as an example, right now, I have 2 grandchildren. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. And her phrase that I've heard now past several months is she looks up at me with these big, beautiful blue eyes, grabs onto my leg, looks at me and says, Nana, me can't. And I look at her and of course, what do? Oh, honey, how can I save you? I've got to work on that because I'm not using that not yet approach with her in any way. I'm running in and I'm saving her at 3 years old. Imagine now her using that to her advantage as she gets older and older. Next thing you know, she's in kindergarten, she's in 4th grade, and she, I can't. Yeah, you can. It's going to be hard though. And I think in a way, hear me out on this, Craig. I think in a way, I understand the purpose of making education fun. Please don't throw slings and arrows at me. I understand that purpose. And I understand teachers gamification and use all this other stuff in their classroom. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But sometimes learning is just hard and it hurts. Why can't we tell them that? Why can't we just be honest and say, this is going to hurt? What resources do we have so the pain isn't so extensive? What can we do to make it what can we do to work to our advantage where, yes, it's going to be challenging, but we can get through it. So the whole idea of a not yet approach, and I do want to read because I want to talk about 3 things if I can do that.
Yes,
stay with
please.
me for a minute. A not yet approach or attitude is an expected part of the learning. An attitude where productive struggle during daily lessons is part of academic growth. Students can learn from and reflect on their learning process independently. Now, I want to back up a little bit and talk about productive struggle. We've heard that buzz phrase for a long time, and it started in math, really. My idea of productive struggle is time and space, giving students time and giving them space to independently figure it out. One of my favorite scenes is from the movie Apollo 13. And I don't know if you remember this scene. If you've seen the movie, you certainly do. The guys are up in the capsule. Things aren't going well. And one of the NASA leaders has a box of stuff. and he calls, all the young, smart men in the room. Again, this is the 60s. Let's just be real. In the room, he takes the box, he dumps it out, and he says, we have to make one of these from all of this. And somebody says, I better get a pot of coffee going. That's one of my favorite scenes, because here's what we're saying. We need you to do this, kids, out of a box of this. Have at it. I think where we make the mistake is just one perimeter after barrier after barrier. Why not say, here it is, have at it, figure it out. That's where time and space comes in. A lot of times teachers don't have the time because they have to get to that next lesson.
Ugh.
And they don't have the space because I have 35 kids in a room. And guess what? Guidance just sent me 3 more and I have no desks. I mean, we've all been there. This is real. So, first of all, we have to define academic growth. My idea of academic growth and yours are 2 different things. So, what is my idea of academic growth? What is my school's definition of academic growth? What is district's definition of academic growth? Is it knowing the standards? Is it being a top quality instructional leader? What does academic growth mean? Second, we have to give students time to reflect. Think about reflection for a minute. Here's how it usually goes. I have 10 minutes left in the lesson. Hey, we have 10 minutes left. How did this lesson go? What did you think? Want to take a few minutes and just write me a, paragraph on how you think the lesson went. That's not reflection. That's just trying to suck up time. Reflection is where students get a chance to actually think about the process. We live in an academic world where we grade product. It's not a bad thing. It's what parents expect. They want to see a letter on a report card based on an assessment, a project, whatever it is. When I talk reflection, I'm talking about giving students a chance during the process to stop and say, how did that go for me? Where was that challenge? Did I successfully meet that obstacle? What resources did I use? Ooh, what resources should I have used? And giving them a chance to actually think about it. So the next time they get a box with stuff, they can indeed put this thing together. And then finally, my last idea would be process, or my last concept is process. Again, my definition, yours are 2 different things. What does process mean? And how do we focus as much on process as product? Now, Rome wasn't built in a day. These questions aren't answered in a class period or among teachers in a PD. But I do think it's something that if it was part of the school year as a principal or a super, you're saying, hey, let's have some of these conversations. And they might be theoretical. I get it. Nothing's wrong with theory. Might be theoretical. But we take these now and let's make them actually tangible for teachers. So again, that's a whole conversation, but giving teachers the chance to use that not yet approach, letting them know, letting their students know obstacles and setbacks are just part of learning, and sometimes it's hard.
So you touched on some things here, a lot of stuff.
Please go ahead.
Oh boy. Okay, let me see how I can frame this here. Okay, productive struggle.
Yeah.
So let me touch on that first.
Please.
And one of the things if educators watching this, I will just tell you how I am, and you can like it or not like it. It's your choice. I am very much an educator where I am always challenging kids to be better. Always. I will always say to students, it is all about high expectations. Mm-hmm. But it's not about my expectations of you. It is about your expectations of you. Because I can only do so much to help you. You have to be willing to help yourself. And while I have never used the term productive struggle, I like it. I've never used it. What I have said is that part of making this class special is for you to be challenged in a way where you believe you can be better. So productive struggle, in my mind, it has to be something where students buy into what that means. because so much in education, Peg, and it's going to go back to what you said about grades. First of all, I think grades are the dumbest thing ever, and
Yes.
anybody can push back. Feel free to comment. Love to hear it. We can have a great discussion. You can hop on the podcast with me, and we can have an hour-long conversation about grades. I'll just simply say, just to back it up, one student has an 89.4, one student has an 89.5. Are you telling me that the 89.5 is an A and the 89.4 is a B plus? How? That doesn't make any sense. You're telling me the 89.5, that student knows more than the 89.4? Productive struggle is something where students have to be much less worried about their grade and much more interested in being better. I'm going to say it again. Students have to be much less worried about that letter or number and much more excited about being better. And how does that happen? Well, it happens by us framing our classes in a way where students can struggle. They can struggle. I teach a lot of fitness. That's kind of my passion, is fitness. Students will come up to me and say to me all the time, Shap, oh my God, I'm having so much trouble squatting. And my first comment is, good, that's great. And they'll look at me like, what do you mean? And I'm like, it's good. You want to struggle. That's how you get better.
Right.
If you got this on day one, what's your incentive to be better? And I think that's something where this is all how we frame our class. Next thing, your reflection piece, which I love. The whole third section of my book is called Look in the Mirror.
Yeah.
That's what it's called, Look in the Mirror. It is all about reflection for us and for our students. And Peg, you nailed it. If you think reflection is just asking kids what they think, is that reflection? I would push back a little bit. I would say it is reflection, but at the most basic level. It is reflection. You are asking people what they thought, which is part of the reflective process. But it is base level. You are at the most basic level. A deeper reflection is getting kids to talk about not just what they learned, but why it was important, what they can do with it, and how they're going to use it.
And one thing I want to say real quickly.
Please.
So I like to think I'm smarter now. I'm just smarter than I was yesterday, smarter than I was a year ago, smarter than I was 30 years ago. And what I used to have my students do, again, fresh out of school, at the end of a unit, and that's a red flag right there at the end of the unit, students would write a Dear Mrs. Grafwallner letter. And I told them, and on the board, I would have bulleted all the units we talked about, all the short stories we read, that kind of thing to remind them. But then I'd say, I want you to reflect on how the unit went. So there were 4 quarters, so it was after every quarter. That's how they wrote these letters. Dear Mrs. Grafwallner. And I said, 2 things are off limits. Actually, 3 things. My hair, because I don't care what you think of my hair. My clothes, you cannot comment on my clothes. And stay the heck away from my shoes. So I don't care, but you comment on everything else. I look back on that, and I think I had the right idea, but I wasn't implementing it the right way. I should have done something like that, smaller increments more often, instead of waiting till the end of the unit. The end of the unit was too late. It was too late. I couldn't fix anything. The feedback they were giving me, one of the things that most of my students said is I talk too fast. I never thought I did. I mean, I get it. So, but I made sure then for the next unit, I slowed down. Well, had I gotten that information much earlier, I would have been doing it a lot sooner. So in retrospect, like you said, I had the right idea at the basics, but now I would implement reflection, again, much smaller doses and more often. So it just goes back to what you were saying absolutely about that basic level. That's where I was.
That's how most people are.
Yeah.
So was I. In my first year of teaching, I didn't even know what the heck reflection was.
Right.
Had no idea what that was because I was 23. I didn't know any. I was just trying to swim.
Right.
Just trying to swim. Here's another thing that's really important, and I'm going to ask a favor. So if you are an educator and you watch this or hear it, I'd like you to answer a question. Okay, and here's the question. When you are done a lesson or a unit, how often do you go back and assess the kids on that what they learned?
Mhm.
So I want you to answer that when you see this, and try to answer it before pause the video because
Mhm.
I'm going to give you a response. When I start teaching a class, so if let's say I'm a health teacher, I'll relate it to the classroom. I think it'll be a little bit easier for people. So our first unit in health is nutrition.
Mhm.
It's a passion of mine. Learning about food, we all need to learn about food. That's life. It's not just in class. We need to learn about food and learn how to eat right. So I'll cover the nutrition unit. Now, after the nutrition unit's done and I've assessed kids, we'll move on to a couple units. And then right in the middle of any unit, I will be like, okay, everybody, can you take out a pencil? And they're like, sure. And I'll give them a nutrition assessment. What do you think they say to me?
I would think some of them would be kind of nervous, like they haven't studied for it, they don't know what's on it. I would think some of them, the blood kind of pressure goes up a little bit,
What do
especially your
you
perfectionists.
what do you think they say?
Is this a test? Are we going to be graded? Is this going in the grade book? What do you think?
Here's what they say. Well, they say, is this going to be graded? But they'll also say, Shap, you didn't tell us you were giving us a quiz.
Of course.
And here's my answer. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, we needed to study. I'm like, what do you mean? Didn't we have nutrition a month ago? And they're like, yeah, but, and I'll stop. I'm like, but what? But what? They're like, well, we didn't study. I'm like, oh, 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 everybody, gotcha. So in your minds, in your minds, Shap should teach you something for a month and then not care whether you know it or not. No, 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 no. It doesn't work like that. I'm not teaching you something for a month. I'm not interested to see if you knew it for a test.
Right.
I'm interested to see if you know it.
Right.
So I should be able to say to Peg, right in the middle of the disease unit, hey, Peg, can you tell me how many calories are in a gram of carbs? And if she says 4, I'm going to say, wow, Peg, I taught you that like 4 months ago. How'd you remember it? She goes, well, I know it. Exactly.
Right. Right.
So that is one of the most critical things that I can say to you is if your goal is to get to a unit and give the kids an assessment, whatever it is, that's fine. But after that, they should still know it. It shouldn't be something where they know it for a unit test. And guess what? If a student says to you, oh, you didn't give us time to study, you need to do a better job of teaching.
Mhm. I agree. Should be part and parcel. Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
And you talked about this. I'm not sure where you mentioned it. She said normalizing obstacles.
When I'm talking about normalizing obstacles, again, and learning should be fun. I understand that. I get it. And I know a lot of teachers like to use gamification in their classrooms and things like that, and that's fine. If it works for you, go ahead. But I think there's a sense too that when we get to an obstacle, students panic. Like, okay, now what do I do? I got the wrong answer. I'm done. Or the teacher's giving me feedback on my essay. I can't redo it. I'm done. Well, those obstacles are just part of learning. So how do you get over them? And one of the things when I work with teachers is say, ask the student, what resources have you used, first of all? Have you used notes? Because I've given you notes. You gave your students notes in health, lots of notes. Did you ask? I mean, if you sit and first, that's the other thing. Hopefully your kids aren't in rows. They're in pods or something a little bit more community driven. Have you asked your pod? Have you asked your peers? I should be the last person you talk to. And the other thing in this too, when we talk about normalizing obstacles, tell me what you've done. Well, I've tried this and this hasn't worked, or I've gone here and this hasn't worked. Okay, so what can we use? I mean, have those conversations on what resources have worked and what doesn't, and why, and how we move forward. So let's actually take time to talk about the obstacle, because sometimes students make them bigger than what they need to be. And what do we need to do to get over it, move forward? You know, I want to share a brief story. So I have two
Please.
children. My son Max is 34, and I always like to tell my audiences I had him when I was 12. I was a very young child bride. And then my daughter Annie, we adopted from a Bulgarian orphanage when Annie was 5 years, 11 months. I'll tell you this, and this will paint the picture. She was in a corner. She literally rocked for 5 years, 11 months, and she weighed 21 pounds. So I think you have an idea of where we are. So
Oh my
we bring
God.
Annie home from a Bulgarian orphanage. And this has a great ending, so I'll tell you the ending right away. She is employed by our local pediatric hospital. She's a lab tech. She's moving out on her own, and she can't wait to just get the heck out of our house. We're kind of in a transition period. Well, she's 28, right? 28-year-old people should be out on their own. Anyway, Annie was about 8 years old or so, and she wanted a hot dog. And she didn't have language. She was still learning language because she spoke infantile babble. Because again, in a corner and around. So Annie comes to me with a package of hot dogs and holds it up. And I said, "Do you want a hot dog?" And she just kind of looked at me, and I said, "Well, you're going to have to open the package." And she looked at me, and I said, "You have to open," because again, she's learning English. "You're going to have to open the package." And she looked at me. 45 minutes later, she is matted with hot dog juice all over herself. I have the entire package of hot dogs all over my floor. She has been sobbing uncontrollably, and she hands me, and even now to this day, I still get weepy. She hands me that hot dog package, and they're open. So a couple days later, when she wanted a hot dog, she went to the cabinet, got the scissors, opened the hot dogs, and gave it to me, and then we had hot dogs. My point to all this is I had the time, I had the space to give her 45 minutes to figure it out. And the thing that breaks my heart is classrooms don't have that time and they don't have that space to allow students to figure it out. It took her 45 minutes, but the next time she needed a hot dog or wanted a hot dog, Craig, it was real easy. She knew exactly what to do. But she had to go through that struggle, which she did. And like I said, I had to take a bath afterwards. The kid's loaded with hot dog juice, but the point is she got it done. It would be wonderful if we could give our students that same kind of opportunity, and yet we can't. And that's the part that I think too with productive struggle. Well, when I'm talking, let me rephrase. Time and space can be limited. I'll word it that way. I think can be limited in some classrooms. I think that's a fair qualifier. And again, if I'm a teacher where I've been mandated by my district where I have to assign so many essays, and I have, I had 180 students at one point, and I only assigned four essays a year. I couldn't grade them fast enough to get feedback back, back to my students. But if I'm in a district where I have to assign 8 of them, that's where I'm talking time and space.
And I think again, like you kind of saw my facial expression when you said can't, and what I would say to that is, and this is a hard conversation. It is a hard conversation. I'm just thinking about a response.
Well, I think maybe I should be careful of the use of the word can't. Let me jump in. As far as time, I could always co-teach, right? I could, make more time that way. As far as space, I can't tell you how many times I moved my students to the library because the library was stadium seating. and it gave them long tables. My students could sit together and work together. I could maneuver quicker around them to ask for help. There are ways around that, but I'm just saying that I had the luxury at home. I'm going to reword it. I had the luxury of home of giving her that opportunity.
Hmm.
Sometimes that doesn't always work in a school setting. I think
Yeah,
that's fair. I
and
think I'll leave it
and
that way.
that is totally fair. I
Yeah.
think it goes back to one of the things that I'll say is that I have had this. I'll tell a quick story. One of my former vice principals, his name is Dr. Mike Devitt. I hope he sees this. Somebody who I admire, respect, amazing leader, good friend, incredible educator. We would have these conversations about standards and objectives. And he would always talk about like seeing the standard and the objective on the board. And I would always push back on him. And I would say, Dr. Devitt, like, the kid doesn't care about the standard on the board. They don't care about it. He goes, but you should. I'm like, oh, I do.
Mhm.
I do. But me putting it on the board does not make them learn it anymore. It's just on the board.
Mhm.
I said, a better thing would be if you came in to watch my class and said to the students, why is what you're learning today important? That is a much more important thing than the words on the board. We would
That's
have this
powerful.
conversation, and my point to it is kind of twofold. The first thing is we have to realize that every kid is unique.
Mhm.
Yes, I know we've heard that, blah, 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 blah. We've heard that, but it's true. It's true. You're seeing kids with all different backgrounds and cultures and motivations and ability levels and struggles. To think that they're all going to get to the same place is just plain silly. It doesn't work like that.
Well, Craig, same place at the same time.
Yes, exactly. That's a much better way to put it, Peg. Much better. Is you have this unit. So let's say you have a month for this unit. To really believe that every kid's going to have the same level of aptitude in that month is just plain silly. And guess what? I'll even frame it like this. As a high school teacher, even in AP classes that kids are generally pretty darn motivated, pretty darn advanced. Even in those instances, kids aren't all getting to the same level at the same time. Because it's just not realistic. We're not making widgets. We're talking about people. And if you have a class that is you know mixed in ability levels, speaking ability, cultural backgrounds, and you're saying to those students, wow, we got a month. That's a poor setup. You're setting yourself up and the students setting themselves up for, this is going to be our next topic, but I don't like this word, but I'll say it. You're setting them up for what? Failure. I don't like that word.
I
I,
don't either.
I dislike that word. I'm going to have Peg talk about it, but a much better way, and this goes back to when Peg was talking about time and space. For me, I am very flexible but with how much time I will give students to do something. Simply for the fact that it might take Peg an hour to do something, to do it well. Well, let me say, to do it well. It might take me a day. So in other words, I have to say, everybody, you got an hour to do this. We got an hour, got to get it done in an hour. Well, what happens after the hour if a kid's struggling? Well, you had an hour. Come on, please. Sorry about that.
And one thing I want to add to that is how often you have to change your learning intention target based on that student. So you're a health teacher and you're teaching nutrition. My daughter needs to know what an expiration date is, and she needs to know not to eat green yogurt. That's what she needs to know in nutrition. So while you're talking maybe about carbs and calories, which would be very conceptual for her and very hard, as a parent, I'd come to you and say, Craig, how can we work together to make this really worthwhile for her. So when she does transition, or when she is living it, she's at home, she pulls something teach, she knows what an expiration date is and can go from there. So not only, as you said, what am I learning in class, but what am I learning based for what that particular student needs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to cover this because this really hit me. So again, this is the notes that I got from Peg. I love them, and I want to read something here because I really think this is. Are you okay with that?
Yes, of course.
I
My
want to
gift
read.
to you.
I want to read something here because this really connected with me. Okay. The definition of failure: to fall short of success when achievement is expected or strongly desired. Labels include deficient or lacking. Does anyone really fail? That's kind of a question. Um, and then I'll kind of leave it there because I want you to talk about it. But before you do, I want to just mention that I do not like the word failure. I said that already. And I've had this conversation with many people I train, coach, teach. Is first of all, if you got a 59 on a test, you didn't fail. I don't even know what that means. You failed. What'd you fail? You got a 59. You got a 59%. You didn't fail. I mean, maybe if the grade is 60, you got below a 60, but you didn't fail. I struggle with that terminology. And a lot of times when we use the term failure, it has such a negative connotation to it
That's it,
that
exactly.
that it I believe it stops many students and even adults from putting forth their best effort because they are afraid of failing. I'll even say this: we're doing the podcast together, having this conversation. There is no failure. There's no failure. Whatever it will be, it will be. People hopefully will love it. If they don't love it, it doesn't mean that we failed. It just means that they didn't love it. And so what? We have to get away from this idea of failure. And it goes back to productive struggle. And it goes back to normalizing obstacles. They're all interconnected in ways. It's much more of a mindset. So you want to touch on that failure piece?
I do, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. The idea, failure it's just it's a bad connotation. I don't know what else to say about it. And I always encourage teachers to get rid of the word. There used to be a workshop out there, and you've heard the title, Failure is Not an Option.
Right.
And I used to cringe when I heard that, because trust me, it can be an option, I guess. But the way I look at failure, and one of my, in my notes, is to me, doing anything for, let me rephrase. There are students out there that think doing anything is risk taking. Anything.
Right.
Whether it's going to school, I'm really taking a risk. Will I be bullied today? I'm going to do that assignment for Shap. Will he like it? Well, I don't know. I'm really taking a risk today. Their whole life might be one big risk according to them. So hypothetically, I've assigned the Romeo and Juliet essay. I would like them to write a thesis paragraph. So that particular student, okay, they're going to take that risk. They hand in a paragraph to me, but it's a body paragraph. Well, they failed, right? Because they didn't follow directions.
Right.
No, I received something. I have
Right.
something. It's just not what I wanted. And I'm going to go back to that student now and say, okay, you tried. Let's tweak this to make this a thesis paragraph. We'll try it again. As opposed to throwing a 0 on it and say, well, you failed. You didn't do it. No, I did it. It's just not what you wanted. And then think about this for a minute. Was I clear enough in my direction? Verbal and written? Was I clear enough in the modeling I gave students? Now, if I get absolutely nothing from that student, there's a lot of questions on that, Craig, and you know that.
Yes.
What's going on? First of all, what's going on at home? And that would be one of the things, I don't know if I'd word it that way, but I say, hey, is everything going on outside of school? How do you know this kid isn't babysitting for 4 siblings and can't get the work done? Just didn't do it because putting food on the table. How do you know the student doesn't have a job? How do you know the student is the only adult at night because mom's working or dad or parents are working third shift? I mean, come on, let's be human here. So failure, just, I agree with you, wipe out that word. And I think we have to look at what I received might just not be the task that I expected. All right, then it's not. What do we do from there? And I think too, again, to combat that and combat that whole mindset, are you giving students all the tools they need so that isn't even a part of it anymore? I'll give you an example. When I was working with a teacher, she liked to, and language is so important, as you know. She would walk into class, science teacher, and she would start by saying, "Oh, this is such an easy lab today. Oh, it's so easy. You guys will get it right away." Guess what? I'm that kid in the back of the room, and that lab isn't easy. And I didn't get it right away. So guess what? I'm not even going to take the darn risk. I'm going to sit here, forget it. Because boy, if I can't get it right, I must really be stupid, because you just got through telling 30 kids it was easy and it didn't make sense to me. So then the teacher is going to obviously, well, the kid failed. Really? I think, Miss Teacher, you have to look inward. How are you phrasing things for students? You know, and you know this, you've been in the field long enough. Semantics, they're important. Change your language, change your mindset, period, end of story. I hate to say it's that simple, but it really is. What language are you using in your classroom where students, I mean, let me phrase it this way. What language, Shap, are you using in your classroom where students want to take that risk? You're telling them, hey, we're in this together. We're going to work together on this. You're not alone. You're not an island. What support do you need? What can we do to get all of us to the goal we want? You even said yourself, classroom's not yours. It belongs to 30 kids. It's our classroom. And as I told you, they were my academic family. So as a family, we take care of each other. How are we going to make this work?
Oh, I love that, Peg. I love that. It's also the things that Peg and I are talking about. It's going to go back to, I was taking a few notes as she was talking, just listening to her conversation. And I was thinking about the empathy piece that we talked about. Whatever your role is, and I would say whatever your role is in whatever job it is, if you work with people, empathy is important. People are coming to you, whether they're your coworker, whether you are their boss or they are your boss. We're coming from so many different lenses of experiences. And one of the things that I remember, one of the things that I didn't realize is when I first started teaching, I had been an athlete in high school and college. I was an athlete. And I took for granted the skills that I had already learned. You know, because like I knew how to do certain things because I just knew how to do them. I had learned them. And I remember the first time I was teaching kids to do some new exercises. I was teaching them how to do like a deadlift. If you don't know, it's just an exercise. And I am not afraid to admit this. I think we have to admit our mistakes. I remember saying to a student, I just like this, I don't understand. Why are you struggling so much? Now, again, I'm saying that, and this was the younger me. I mean, I didn't know I was young. I was like 24. I didn't know. It seemed so easy. Like why can't you just deadlift? And now when I teach deadlifting, which I still teach all the time, I'll be teaching again in a month and a half. I would never say that. I would never say to a student, why are you struggling so much? My response would be, yes, we're getting better. Let's keep at it. Here, tell me how this feels. Tell me what you think this looks like. What can we do? Think about the semantics of those terms. They are so radically different in what you will be willing to get out of that student. The first student completely shut down. Students now, not everyone. Some students, no matter how much you try, are going to be afraid to take a risk. That's human. It's the same thing with it. Here, Peg is on the podcast with me. There is a risk. There is a risk. I don't consider the risk to be something huge, but maybe she does. Who knows? There is a risk.
And one of the things you had said is, for some people, as we talked about, to even take that risk. I remember so often working with students and just to get something on paper, right? Just something. And I would start by saying to them, in a past life, I was an administrative assistant and I can type about 73 words a minute. So I'd say to the student, so let's say, Craig, you're in my class. And again, let's go back to the Romeo and Juliet essay. I'd say to you, well, who do you think's responsible for the death of Romeo and Juliet? Well, I don't know. You know what? Why don't you talk and I'll type? And the student would look at me and say, wait, you'll do that? Sure. Because I'm a much quicker typist than you are. I can type 73 words a minute. You talk, I'm going to type, double space, triple space. Then we're going to take a red pen, get rid of all the stuff we don't like. The stuff we do like, we're going to make real pretty sentences, and that'll be a first body paragraph. And then we're going to go from there. I can't tell you how often that worked because it was, first of all, we're talking in conversation just like you and I are right now.
Yes.
The risk level is so much lower. I'm keeping track pretty much of every single thing you're saying. And then we're just going to go through and get rid of what we don't like. And the kid's like, well, I can do that. Well, of course you can. And think about the deadlift. I bet now you probably stand next to a student, you model that deadlift, you take it in pieces, you chunk it out, you talk through, well, okay, is it the back? Let's work on form. This is my form. Show me your, we're so much smarter now.
And I'll say that I would like you to do me a favor. I would like you to repeat briefly your Romeo and Juliet having the kid talk and you're going to type. Just repeat it again.
So what I would do is I would often say to a student, I'd go up to them and say, okay, and Craig, I'll use you as an example. Who's responsible for the death of Romeo and Juliet? And I'd say to the student, I can type about 72 words a minute. So I'm going to have you talk. And as you talk, I'm just going to type everything you say. So let's model this for our audience. So Craig, you go ahead and start. Who's responsible for the death of Romeo and Juliet? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure. You have to help me a little bit. I'm actually not sure.
Right. So think about it. You even said you're not sure. Tell me something about Romeo. Why do you think he might be responsible for his own death? Tell me the kind of character he is. Do you remember?
I guess he would be, I guess maybe part hero,
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. Hero, he's a young man. Tell me the traits of young men.
I guess being macho, thinking that they have to be perfect, not wanting to fail,
Tell me
trying
what they
to.
like to. How do they behave in front of the ladies?
Oh yeah, well they have to prove themselves constantly, and I
So
think
I would
that.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, please go on.
So I would take everything you just said now, and I type it up, and then I'd say, well, tell me something about Juliet, because Juliet eventually, let's face it, kills herself.
Mm-hmm.
Why does she do that? What do you think? Well, she loved Romeo so much. Okay, so we type that. My point is, in modeling this is what I would do. I would spend that kind of time with students. And a lot of it is like I did with you. I would ask more questions. You're thinking, well, students, young people, they don't want to appear like they fail. They are brazen among the women, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Type all that up. And then you give to the student and say, okay, let's take these words and let's make real nice sentences out of them, something a little bit more complex. Let's put it together in a paragraph. And then we're going to add a little evidence. You even said yourself that Romeo was the hero. Let's find a place where he's a hero, right here, where he stood up for his friend Mercutio. You're absolutely right. What a hero. Great job, Craig. Let's use that piece of evidence to prove what you just said. That's what I would do.
And I would say that this is where I was going with this. I was listening to the way you were talking, and the first thing I thought about is if I was the student in this class, the first thing I would think about, wow, Miss Grafwallner, she really cares about me. She's interested. Because I was listening to your tone. That's why I asked you to repeat.
Here, I thought I talked too fast.
I was listening. That's why I asked you to repeat it, because I heard it the first time, but I want the audience to know that that is not something you can easily teach. Having that ability to connect with a student in that way, with that kind voice, it is obvious that you care, because I could just pick it up. I could just pick it up. I was just picturing sitting in class and me being the student and you asking me that and thinking, wow, I am going to try this because my teacher cares so deeply about my success. So,
And when was the last time you read Romeo and Juliet?
oh my God, probably high school.
Freshman English.
God, I mean, I'm thinking about what I remember, and now some of the stuff that you're saying is coming back to me, but I don't remember 3/4 of Romeo and Juliet. I mean,
But here's the best part. You were giving me keywords, and as you were giving me keywords, I could turn around then and ask you questions, and I kept getting a little bit out of you every time.
yes,
And that's really what, when you think about it, that's what normalizing that obstacle is all about. There's that obstacle. I don't know if I want to take a risk on this. Well, how do we normalize it? Well, let's work together. Let's talk about what you already know. See, this is where I think in teaching, we need to back up. What do you already know? I'm real quick on telling you what you don't know. That's my job. But what do you already know? And look at that prior knowledge. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But in prior knowledge, where we have a lot of students that come to us with very little. That's just where we are now. Due to logistics, due to financial, due to a lot of different reasons. What can we do though to give ourselves to give our students the opportunity to share with us what they already know? And that is as vital, as important as us filling that cup of what they don't know.
and it's funny when you asked me about Romeo and Juliet, I wasn't really sure what you did that I think is critical, that I do not see a lot of teachers do. I see some do it, but not most in my experience. Is instead of giving up and saying, "Well, figure it out,"
Right,
which is critical.
right.
That kind of goes back to, if I would have read Romeo and Juliet a year ago, I would have immediately had an answer. But it's so far out of my brain. I don't teach English. I've read it 50, 40 years ago. By giving that prompt, that is something that's not only a teaching skill, it is showing the student that you are willing to meet them where they are.
And I think
Another,
that's critical. That goes back to you were saying earlier with your own classroom. Whose classroom is it? It's our classroom, right? It belongs to us. So how do we make it work for us?
yes. Wow, great conversation. Mm. Okay, let me ask you a couple other things. So, because of time, so tell me
Yeah.
a couple things you're proud of.
Well, I mean, academically,
Anything you
or
want.
well, I would say
Anything.
my family. I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate. I have wonderful friends. I get to do fun things like this, with you. Um, I'm just very fortunate, and I think I'm a happy person. I really do. I mean, there are times where I look around and think, wow, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. We feel good today. Um, and my health. I try and do the very best I can, and I try and take good care of the people around me.
I love it.
And as you and I were talking earlier in the state of education, it's messy, and we have to take care of each other, not only as people, but we have to take care of each other as educators. We no longer can survive, not that we ever could, in a silo, on an island. We are all in this together for the sake of our kids. So when I see this constant infighting among educators, I really stop. Again, this is for our students.
I love it. Tell me a couple challenges that you've had that you've overcome.
I think again, personally, our daughter. I mean, that was one of those things where that's where I learned, Craig. And I'll tell you, when you talk about asking for support and asking for help, and I want to touch on that very quickly. I always encourage people when they work with Annie not to help her, because help comes from a saving mentality. I'm going to swoop in and save you. I don't want anybody to save her, because the world is cold, dark, and not nice sometimes. What I want you to do is support her, give her the tools she'll need, that she can figure it out and live independently and be an independent woman. That's what I want. So I try and encourage people. Helping, like I said, comes from that idea. I'm just going to come in and pick you up and make everything better. Craig, sometimes I can't make everything better. I don't have that ability. I don't have that expertise, but I can support you. That's for sure. So definitely working, loving Annie, being a part of her life. And I'll tell your audience very quickly, had we not adopted her, the way the adoption system worked in Bulgaria was at 15, she would have been out on her own. And she either would have been sold into human trafficking, or she would have died. It was one or the other. That's what would have happened, especially with her mental capacity. So she's number one, I would have to say. And just in general, I think one of the challenges is, what can I do? Again, as much as I love education and consider it a wonderful part of my life, it is a challenge. As you said earlier, being in the teacher's lounge and listening to the negativity. Sometimes when I present, you hear a lot of negativity. Okay, what can we do to make this better?
Yeah.
So 2 challenges that I think I'm very proud of working through.
I want you to
work through.
tell me something you're proud of professionally.
Oh, I think that would have to be 30 years in education. And to still be friends with my freshman students who are now 45 years old. And to still, I know, right? That blows my mind. But to still get texts from them. I just got one the other day from a student who thanked me. And that was, again, 40 years ago. So that's pretty cool.
Yes. I was just, I had mentioned this to somebody else. I was walking through my neighborhood with my wife. We go for walks every night.
Sure.
And, I live in the district where I teach.
Okay.
So I will see students a lot.
Yeah.
They'll be, hey, Shap. Hi. The other day, I'm walking through our neighborhood, and there's another older neighborhood that's right near mine. It's like a 2-mile walk we do. And as we're walking, my wife and I comment, somebody's outside working on their garden. And we said to her, just, oh my God, your garden looks so nice. And she's like, Mr. Shapiro. And I'm like, yes. She's like, yeah, you were my teacher 20 something years ago. And I was like, oh God, do I feel old? And she's like, she's like, oh my God, you still look exactly the same. I'm like, I don't feel the same.
Yeah.
So
But doesn't that just make your day when you get those emails or those phone calls or kids reach out? And it's funny because, like I said, my first freshman class, they're 45 years old. And I saw one the other day at the gym, and she's now a personal trainer. And she said, Mrs. Grafwallner. And I looked at her, I said, oh my gosh. And we were talking, she's got 2 kids. I said, how can you have 2 kids? You're 14. And she finally now can call me Peg. And she said, please know it's everything within me to do that. So she said, every time I call you that, it's like I'm trying, but it's not right. And I thought, oh, yeah, we're pretty lucky, Craig. We're pretty lucky.
We are, I'll kind of finish with this, and then I want you to think about a closing message, okay?
Okay.
So think about a closing message. One of the things that you just touched on that I think is critical, I'm going to tie it into a couple things. Being in education, and I know this is going to come kind of cliche-ish, it is a blessing. Mm-hmm. You have the ability to touch students' lives every day. Now, let me put a little caveat on it. I didn't say perfect. It's not perfect. There's going to be struggles, as Peg talked about. Okay? That's just part of life. But if you think about the difference that you're making in people's lives. Your former student who you saw at the gym, you obviously connected with her. Education gives you a chance to make a difference in people's lives. It's just the way it is. Sometimes, and most of the time, really in a positive way. So just wanted to throw that out there. You got me thinking about it. You have a closing message?
I was, as you were talking and I was thinking about what you were saying, I know I'm going to use the cliche too. Be kind. We are this is a tough juncture in our world right now with everything happening, just politically, personally, what else? Spiritually, I mean, name the ly. There's a lot going on, and again, the cliche, Craig, the kind smile, just saying thank you, holding a door open. I was in line the other day. Somebody, ahead of me paid for my big Diet Coke at the Chick-fil-A. I mean, come on, that is just, it's kind. So that would be my message. Again, nothing overwhelming, nothing profound, but this opportunity to talk with you, and we are kindred spirits. I think your audience can see that. This opportunity to talk to you, this opportunity to share what I think, have this kind of really warm conversation. This is the closing message. You and I have talked on Twitter for, I'd say, a couple of years for sure.
Yep.
You have a wonderful Twitter chat that I join as often as I can. But this is the first time you and I really talked face to face. And yet I think if we were sitting here in my living room, we would be 4 or 5 hours down the road. This is what it's all about. Like you said, making those connections and realizing we are together on this. We really are. So this has been wonderful for me. Thank you.
And it's been wonderful for me. If people want to get in touch with you, connect, what can they do?
I would suggest my website, www.peggrafwallner.com. PEGGRAF as in Frank, WALLNER. That's the easiest way, the quickest way. Or the other way is if you want to email me, peggrafwallner@gmail.com. And again, I'd love to continue the conversation. I really would. I told Craig, I just presented last week in Texas, and I've got several people that I've already emailed and said, hey, what do you think? It's just fun. It's just a fun way to keep in touch. And again, going back to what you were saying, no risk.
Yep.
Because we're doing the best we can.
Yep. Okay. Peg, thank you so much for being an amazing guest and sharing your passion. We have the same passion, and that's helping students. Please hang on once I'm done for a sec, if you don't mind. Everybody, I'm going to have Peg's contact information at the end. You'll be able to see her website. I'll put the information at the end. So please check it out. Please reach out to her. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. That's how we build the channel out. Also, I have just started a new podcast with Dr. Christopher Jones. It is called Small Nuggets, Big Change. We just released our first episode today. Well, when you see this, it will be a couple weeks, but it's very cool. It's very cool. It's short, to the point. I think you really like it. Closing message. Here it is. I'm basically just going right from what Peg said, and it's simple. Please be kind. Thank you, everybody, for all you do. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.